Welcome, and thank you for being here. You are listening to Sleepy Historian, a place where history moves slowly, speaks softly, and never asks you to stay awake longer than you wish. You can listen closely, or you can let the words drift past you, like quiet footsteps in fresh snow. Either way is perfectly fine. Before we begin, allow yourself to get comfortable. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breathing slow, just a little without effort. There is nowhere you need to go and nothing you need to do. The night can carry this story for you. Tonight, we are stepping back into a world where winter nights were not simply darker or colder, but genuinely uncertain. A world where the sun disappeared early, sometimes before the day felt finished. Where darkness arrived not as rest, but as a long test of patience and endurance. We will be speaking quietly about medieval winter nights and why they were so dangerous, even when nothing dramatic happened at all. In the medieval world, night was not a pause. It was a condition. It settled into the land like frost, slow and unavoidable. When winter arrived, daylight shortened steadily, until afternoon felt like evening, and evening felt like the edge of something unknown. People learned to notice the sun carefully, because once it dropped behind hills or walls, the cold seemed to deepen almost immediately. You might imagine yourself standing just outside a small village as the sun lowers. The light is pale, thin, and already tired. Shadows stretch longer than they should. The ground is stiff beneath your feet, hardened by repeated freezing. Breath leaves your mouth in a faint cloud, even before true night has arrived. This is the moment when people began to turn inward, toward walls, doors, and fire. Winter nights were feared, not because something always happened, but because something could. Cold did its work quietly. Hunger worked even more slowly. Illness waited patiently for bodies already weakened by short days and limited food. And darkness, once it settled, made everything harder to judge. Here, in Sleepy Historian, we don't rush toward danger. We let it exist gently, as medieval people did, always present, rarely dramatic, and deeply woven into daily life. The danger of winter nights was not loud. It was steady. It was the knowledge that the fire might fade, that the roof might leak cold air, that morning might take longer than expected to arrive. As you listen, you may notice the rhythm of repetition. This is intentional. Medieval life repeated itself constantly, especially in winter. The same tasks, the same worries, the same careful counting of hours until daylight returned. Repetition, after all, is comforting. It gives the mind something predictable to hold on to, even in the dark. If you find yourself drifting, that is welcome here. Sleepy Historian is not meant to be consumed sharply. You're allowed to miss details. You're allowed to forget names and places. The feeling is what matters more than the facts. And if you are enjoying these quiet journeys through the past, you might consider gently liking the video or subscribing to the channel. You can also leave a comment later, if you wish, telling me where you fell asleep. Many listeners do. It is a quiet tradition here. Now, let's return to winter. In medieval times, night was longer than people wanted and colder than they could easily manage. Homes were built from wood, stone, and earth, materials that held cold stubbornly. Even when fires burned, warmth rarely reached every corner. People dressed in layers, but fabric was precious and imperfect. Cold seeped in anyway, through floors, through walls, through silence itself. Outside, roads vanished into darkness early. Snow muffled sound, making familiar paths feel unfamiliar. A traveler delayed by even a small mistake could find themselves walking far longer than planned, with daylight already gone and shelter uncertain. Villages became islands of light in a sea of shadow, and missing one could mean hours more exposure. Inside homes, families gathered close. Animals were brought nearer, sometimes indoors, their warmth useful, their presence reassuring. Fires were fed carefully, not lavishly. Fuel was precious, and a fire burned too quickly could leave nothing for later hours, when the cold felt sharpest. Winter nights also stretched the body. Sleep was lighter, interrupted by the need to tend fires, check animals, or simply shift position to relieve aching joints. Cold made even rest an effort, and illness, when it came, often worsened at night when bodies had fewer distractions and less warmth to rely on. Not everyone saw the morning. Medieval people understood this without needing to speak it aloud. They noticed who failed to rise. They noticed beds that stayed still. Winter decided quietly and without announcement, but most nights passed without incident. And this is important to remember. Survival was not dramatic. It was slow. It was the accumulation of small decisions made correctly over and over again. Closing a door tightly, saving a log for later, sharing space, waiting. As you listen now, you might imagine yourself wrapped in heavier clothing than usual. You feel the weight of it pressing gently against you. You sit or lie close to others, sharing warmth. The fire nearby crackles softly, not loudly, just enough to remind you it is there. Outside, the wind moves across frozen ground, carrying no message, only sound. Time moves differently in winter nights. Hours feel longer. Darkness feels thicker. People learn to measure time not by clocks, but by changes in sound, in cold, in the fire's glow. A night was not a single thing. It was many small moments strung together, each one endured quietly. Tonight's story will move through those moments. From sunset, when roads emptied and doors closed, into the deep of night, where listening mattered more than seeing. And finally, toward morning, when light returned slowly, without promise of warmth, but with relief all the same. You do not need to stay awake for all of it. Let the words settle around you like snowfall, soft, steady, and patient. Let the medieval night exist beside you, distant and calm, no longer dangerous, only remembered. We will begin where winter nights always began, with the fading of the light. The shortening of the day did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, almost politely, week by week, until people realized that afternoon no longer felt complete. In the depths of a medieval winter, the sun began its descent while work still waited to be finished. Fields, roads, and courtyard were touched by shadow long before the body felt ready to stop moving. In these months, daylight was thin and pale. It did not linger. It slid across the land without warmth, offering just enough visibility to guide hands and feet, then quietly withdrew. People learned to notice the light with care. A glance at the sky, a pause to measure the length of shadows, a shared understanding that time was narrowing. You might imagine yourself standing on a familiar path, one you have walked many times. In summer, it feels wide and welcoming. In winter, as the sun lowers too early, it begins to close in. The edges blur. The ground hardens beneath your boots. Frost clings to grass and stone alike. Each breath leaves your mouth in a soft cloud, rising and disappearing before you can watch it fully fade. There is no sudden alarm when daylight fails. Instead, there is a quiet shift in behavior. Voices lower. Movements become more deliberate. Tasks are prioritized differently. What can be finished quickly is done first. What can wait until tomorrow is left behind, even if it feels unfinished. Medieval people were practiced at this kind of judgment, shaped by seasons that demanded attention. As the sun sinks, doors begin to close, not abruptly, but one by one. A stable door is latched. A gate is drawn inward. A final look is taken down the road, not expecting to see much, but checking all the same. Travelers who have not yet arrived are noted quietly. Their absence is felt more strongly in winter than in any other season. On the roads, the change is especially noticeable. Paths that carried carts and footsteps through the morning grow empty. Snow, when it falls, softens the surface, muting sound and making distance harder to judge. Ruts and stones disappear beneath a white cover, turning familiar routes uncertain. A road at dusk feels longer than it did at noon, even when the distance is the same. Those still traveling feel the pressure of the lowering sun in their bodies. Shoulders tense, steps quicken slightly, though not enough to waste energy. The mind begins to calculate. how far to the next shelter, how much light remains, how strong the wind feels against the face. These thoughts do not rush. They repeat themselves steadily, like a quiet counting. Villages become places of contrast. From a distance, they appear calm, small clusters of structures resting in the landscape. As you draw closer, you notice signs of retreat. Smoke thickens above roofs as fires are strengthened for the night. Figures move quickly between buildings, their outlines darkening as light fades. Then, gradually, movement slows and the village pulls inward. Inside walls and homes, people respond to the early sunset with practiced routines. Tools are gathered and stored. Animals are brought closer to shelter. Food is checked, portions measured carefully, not just for the evening meal, but for the long hours ahead. Winter nights demand planning, even in these small acts. The cold deepens as daylight withdraws. Stone and earth release what little warmth they held during the day. Floors grow colder beneath bare or lightly covered feet. Benches, walls, and door frames carry a chill that lingers against skin. People shift closer to fires, not dramatically, but gradually, inch by inch. Children notice the change in light, perhaps more clearly than adults. The day feels cut short. There is less time to wander, less time to play. They are guided indoors earlier, their movements slowed by layers of clothing and the watchful hands of older family members. Night, in winter, is not a place for lingering. You may imagine yourself seated near a doorway as the last light fades. The sky outside shifts from pale gray to a deeper blue, then to something darker and less defined. Details dissolve. Trees become shapes. Paths become suggestions rather than clear lines. The world simplifies itself, removing excess information, leaving only what is close and immediate. In medieval winters, there were no lights waiting along roads, no markers glowing in the distance. Once the sun disappeared, darkness arrived fully and without assistance. Even the moon, when present, offered limited help, its light reflected unevenly by snow or absorbed by cloud. This is when the danger of winter nights began, not as a sudden threat, but as an accumulation. Cold worked steadily. Fatigue settled into muscles already tired from shortened days. Decisions made in fading light carried more weight. A missed turn, a delayed stop, a forgotten task could follow a person into the night, lingering quietly. Inside homes, the atmosphere changed as well. Shadows lengthened along walls. Corners of rooms grew darker. Firelight took on greater importance, not only for warmth but for orientation. People arranged themselves so that faces remained visible, voices recognizable. Darkness, when allowed to isolate, was unsettling. Yet there was also familiarity here. This pattern repeated every winter. People expected it. They prepared for it. They did not resist the night so much as accommodate it. The early sunset became a signal to slow down, to narrow focus, to conserve strength. You may feel this slowing yourself as you listen. The idea of daylight slipping away early invites rest, even now. It suggests an inward turn, a drawing closer to what is known and warm. The body recognizes this instinctively, responding to diminishing light with a desire for stillness. As night fully claims the sky, medieval people understood that the work of survival was not finished. It had simply changed form, from movement to waiting, from visibility to listening, from action to endurance. The sun had done its part, however briefly. What remained was the long stretch ahead, shaped by cold, quiet, and patience. And this was only the beginning. As daylight faded beyond recovery, medieval life folded itself inward. What had been open during the day now narrowed, both physically and emotionally. Doors that stood wide in warmer months were drawn closed with care. Not slammed, not hurried, but secured with a deliberate finality that acknowledged the coming hours. A wooden door in winter was more than a boundary. It was a promise that cold would be kept at a manageable distance, that wind would be slowed, that darkness would be held outside as long as possible. Hands checked latches twice. Fingers tested hinges. A beam was set into place, its weight reassuring against the frame. These actions were small, but they carried meaning shaped by experience. Inside homes, the atmosphere changed almost immediately once doors were closed. Sound softened. The outside world became muted, reduced to distant wind and occasional creaks. The air grew warmer near the hearth, though warmth was never evenly shared. Heat rose and gathered near ceilings, leaving floors cold and feet numb. People learned to sit, sleep, and work where warmth lingered longest. Homes were rarely spacious. In winter, they felt even smaller. Furniture was minimal, often pushed closer together. Benches lined walls. Tables served multiple purposes: eating, mending, sorting, preparing. The space between people shrank naturally, not out of affection alone, but necessity. Shared warmth mattered. You might imagine yourself entering such a room as night settles. The ceiling is low. Smoke curls upward from the hearth, escaping slowly through a hole or narrow chimney. The smell of burning wood mixes with wool, leather, and earth. It is not unpleasant, but it is thick, familiar, unavoidable. Your eyes adjust gradually to the dim light. Larger halls followed similar patterns, though on a different scale. In manor houses or communal buildings, doors were closed early. Tapestries were hung not just for decoration, but for insulation. Rushes or straw were spread across floors to trap warmth and soften the cold beneath. Even so, winter pressed inward relentlessly, seeping through stone walls and heavy beams. Animals, too, were brought closer. Chickens were gathered. Sheep and goats were moved into sheltered areas, sometimes beneath the same roof as people. Their presence added warmth and sound, a shifting, breathing reminder of life continuing through the night. The smell was strong, but familiar. In winter, comfort often outweighed cleanliness. Food preparation became quieter as evening deepened. Meals were simple, warm when possible. Broth, bread, preserved vegetables, foods that filled the body without waste. Portions were measured carefully. Winter nights were long, and hunger had a way of returning before morning. Saving something for later hours was a quiet act of foresight. Once doors were closed and meals finished, movement slowed. There was less reason to cross the room repeatedly. People settled into places they would keep for hours. Cloaks remained on shoulders. Blankets were wrapped tightly. Hands were kept busy with small tasks: mending, carving, sorting, partly for usefulness, partly to keep blood moving. You may picture yourself seated near the hearth, feeling warmth on your face while your back remains cold. You shift slightly, adjusting position to find balance. This small movement repeats throughout the evening. Comfort is temporary and must be maintained gently. Outside, darkness fully claims the land. Roads are no longer visible. Courtyards fade into shapes and shadows. Anyone still outdoors moves with caution or not at all. Inside, the closing of doors creates a sense of separation from that uncertainty. The world has been divided into what is within reach and what is beyond it. This separation brings a subtle relief, but not complete ease. Doors can close out wind, but not cold entirely. They cannot stop illness carried within bodies already weakened. They cannot guarantee that the fire will last until dawn. Medieval people understood this balance instinctively. Safety was partial. Comfort was relative. As the night deepens, attention turns inward. Conversations soften. Stories are told quietly, often repeated, familiar enough to require little effort. Silence becomes acceptable. It is not empty, but filled with listening, the crackle of fire, the settling of wood, the breathing of animals, and people sharing space. In these moments, winter nights reveal their true character. They are not defined by dramatic events, but by endurance, by waiting, by maintaining warmth, awareness, and patience over many slow hours. The closed door is not an ending, but a threshold, a point beyond which time stretches quietly. You may feel the pull of this stillness yourself, the sense that once doors are closed, the world simplifies, that focus narrows, that rest becomes not just desired but necessary. Homes and halls held medieval people together against the night. They were imperfect shelters, shaped by limitations, yet essential. Within their walls, people waited for morning, counting time not in minutes, but in shifts of cold and warmth, sound and silence. And beyond those doors, winter waited just as patiently. Once the doors were closed and the outside world was held at bay, firelight became the center of everything. It was not simply a source of warmth. It was orientation. It was reassurance. It was time itself, measured in glowing embers and slowly collapsing logs. In medieval winter nights, fire was watched carefully, not stared at but noticed constantly. A quick glance to see how low it burned. A quiet judgment of whether another log should be added now, or saved for later hours when the cold would bite more deeply. Fuel was never wasted casually. Each piece of wood carried the weight of future warmth. You might imagine yourself sitting near the hearth, eyes adjusting to the gentle flicker. The light does not reach far. It pools around the fire, leaving the edges of the room in soft shadow. Faces nearest the flames are clear, while those farther away blur into outline and movement. The room feels smaller, more contained, shaped by light rather than walls. Shadows shift constantly. They stretch and contract as flames move. A hanging tool sways slightly and casts a longer shape than expected. A beam above catches the light, then releases it. Nothing here is threatening, yet nothing is entirely still. The eye learns to accept this motion without reacting to it. Firelight also brings awareness of vulnerability. A fire that warms can also fail. Logs burn down, embers cool, smoke thickens if airflow changes. Someone must remain attentive, even while resting. Often this attention is shared, passed quietly from one person to another as the night progresses. The air near the hearth feels warmer, but uneven. One side of the body may relax while the other stiffens. Hands extend toward the heat, fingers spread gently, then withdraw when warmth becomes too sharp. This movement repeats again and again, a quiet rhythm of approach and retreat. In larger spaces, firelight struggles even more. A hall may hold several fires, yet still feel cold. Stone walls absorb warmth slowly and release it reluctantly. The light from flames dances across rough surfaces, revealing textures briefly before letting them slip back into shadow. Winter nights turn familiar spaces into places that must be relearned each evening. Firelight also reveals fatigue. Faces glow softly, eyes reflecting light that makes tiredness more visible. Movement slow, voices drop in volume. Even conversation changes shape, becoming shorter, less demanding. Silence stretches longer between words, and no one rushes to fill it. You may notice how your own breathing responds to this imagined scene. Slower, deeper. The steady crackle of fire invites stillness. It gives the body permission to rest, even while awareness remains. Yet safety is never complete. A fire that burns too hot risks consuming fuel too quickly. A fire that burns too low risks fading entirely. Sparks must be watched. Smoke must be guided upward. Medieval homes were familiar with accidents, and caution lived alongside comfort. Children are drawn toward the fire, but gently guided back. Elders sit closest, where warmth eases stiff joints and aching bones. Others position themselves in layers behind, catching what heat they can. Blankets and cloaks are adjusted repeatedly, pulled tighter as the night deepens. Outside the circle of light, darkness feels heavier. Corners of rooms hold shapes that remain undefined. People learn not to stare too long into these areas. Not because they fear what might be there, but because the mind, when tired, begins to imagine. Firelight teaches the eyes where to rest. The fire also marks time. As logs settle and embers glow, hours pass without announcement. There are no bells, no clocks ticking steadily through the night. Instead, there is observation. Someone notices when the fire changes sound. Someone else feels the cold returning sooner than expected. Decisions are made quietly. You might imagine the sound of wood shifting, a soft crack followed by a brief flare of light. The room brightens for a moment, then settles again. Shadows jump, then resume their slow movement. Nothing dramatic happens, yet attention sharpens briefly before relaxing once more. In winter nights, this balance between vigilance and rest defines survival. Too much alertness exhausts the body. Too little invites risk. Medieval people learned to hover between the two, guided by experience rather than instruction. As the night progresses, some prepare to sleep near the fire. Others remain seated, leaning against walls or benches, their awareness fading and returning in cycles. Sleep is light and easily broken. A change in temperature, a sound, or a shift in light brings eyes open again. Firelight softens faces and thoughts alike. It narrows the world to what can be seen and felt immediately. Distant worries lose shape. The future shrinks to the next hour, the next log, the next breath of warm air. In this way, fire becomes not just protection against cold, but a quiet teacher. It teaches patience. It teaches attention. It teaches acceptance of limits. As you listen, you may feel drawn toward that circle of light, toward the calm repetition of watching and waiting, toward the sense that nothing needs to happen quickly. Beyond the firelight, winter remains vast and cold. Within it, people endure, guided by flickering warmth and the steady passing of time. And as the flames continue their slow work, the night settles fully into place. When true night finally settled in, rest became a careful arrangement rather than a simple act. In medieval winter, sleep was shaped by necessity, by cold, and by the quiet understanding that warmth was something to be shared, not wasted. Beds, as we imagine them now, were rare. What mattered more than comfort was proximity to heat, to bodies, to walls that blocked the wind. People slept where warmth gathered naturally, often close to the hearth, though never so close as to invite sparks or smoke. You might picture a long room slowly dimming as fires were banked low. Straw mattresses rested directly on wooden frames or the packed earth floor. Some are little more than sacks filled with dried grass, flattened by use. Over them lay woolen blankets, heavy and coarse, smelling faintly of smoke and lanolin. Sleep was not private. It was communal. Family members lay side by side, their bodies arranged carefully to trap heat. Children were placed between adults. The elderly found places where warmth lingered longest. Even strangers, travelers, servants, laborers might share space on especially cold nights. There was no embarrassment in this closeness. It was practical. Bodies produced heat, and winter nights demanded efficiency. To sleep alone was to lose warmth quickly. To sleep together was to survive. Cloaks were not removed. Boots were sometimes loosened but rarely taken off entirely. A belt might remain fastened, a knife kept within reach. Sleep came layered, wrapped in everything one owned that could block the cold. As you imagine settling into such a space, you might feel the unevenness beneath you, the firmness of straw, the slow shifting as others adjust their position, a quiet rustle of wool as someone pulls a blanket higher over their shoulders. Breathing becomes noticeable, not loud but present. A shared rhythm fills the darkness. Inhaling cool air, exhaling warmth that gathers briefly beneath blankets before slipping away. The cold presses in from all sides. Stone walls release the chill they absorbed during the day. Floors draw warmth downward. Even the air feels heavy, reluctant to hold heat for long. Sleep is entered carefully, not all at once. People drift rather than collapse into rest. Eyes close, then open again. The body relaxes, then tightens as cold fingers touch skin or a blanket shifts. This cycle repeats many times through the night. Shared warmth creates its own small comfort. A shoulder pressed lightly against another. The steady presence of a nearby body. These signals reassure the mind, reminding it that one is not alone in the dark. You may imagine the sounds that accompany this rest. A cough suppressed quickly. The creak of wood as someone turns. A quiet sigh as warmth redistributes. No one speaks unless necessary. Words cost energy, and the night is long. In some homes, Animals shared sleeping spaces as well. A dog curled near feet, livestock housed nearby, their body heat seeping faintly through walls. These arrangements blurred the line between human and animal shelter, all part of a single effort to endure the cold. Sleep positions were chosen carefully, turning away from drafts, nestling closer to warmth, pulling fabric over exposed skin. Every small adjustment mattered. Dreams, when they came, were shallow. The body remained alert, ready to wake at changes in temperature or sound. A sudden quiet from a hearth, a gust of wind against shutters, a movement in the room. You might notice how different this rest feels from modern sleep. There is no expectation of uninterrupted hours. Night is not a single block of rest, but a series of pauses, each one earned and fragile. Despite this, fatigue eventually softens resistance. Muscles loosen, thoughts slow. Awareness drifts closer to sleep, hovering just above it. The shared warmth makes this possible, even if only briefly. Blankets are adjusted again and again. Someone gently tucks fabric around child. Another shifts to allow space for a restless sleeper. These movements are instinctive, practiced through many winters. Cold teaches cooperation. It teaches bodies to align, to yield space, to accept closeness without question. In the darkness, social boundaries fade. What remains is the simple need to stay warm until morning. Hours pass quietly. No announcement marks them. Only subtle changes, the fire dimming further, the air growing sharper, the body seeking tighter curls. You may imagine your own breath slowing as you listen. The steady cadence of inhaling and exhaling mirrors those long-ago sleepers. The night stretches, but it does not rush. Eventually, some reach deeper rest. Others remain half awake, drifting in and out, keeping watch without intending to. This shared vigilance is another form of warmth, less visible but just as real. Winter nights demand endurance more than bravery. They are survived through small decisions repeated patiently, through closeness accepted, through sleep taken when possible and released when necessary. As the night continues, shared warmth holds the cold at bay, not entirely, but enough. Enough to make it through. Once sleep had settled into the room, the night revealed itself not through sight, but through sound. Medieval darkness was never silent. It spoke softly, in layers, through the small and ordinary noises that surrounded those trying to rest. With eyes closed, hearing became sharper. Every sound seemed closer, more important. In winter, when daylight was brief and the cold pressed inward, these sounds carried weight. They were signals of safety or of change. Closest of all was the hearth. Even after flames had been lowered and embers spread thin, it continued to speak. A quiet crackle, a soft pop as a piece of wood shifted. Occasionally, a gentle collapse as ash settled. These sounds reassured those listening that warmth still lived nearby. You might imagine lying still, listening to that rhythm, not loud enough to demand attention, but steady enough to anchor the mind. As long as the hearth murmured, the night felt held. Beyond the fire came breathing, many breaths, overlapping but never synchronized. Some deep and slow, others shallow, interrupted by the cold. A child's breath might stutter briefly before finding rhythm again. An older sleeper might release a long exhale, followed by silence that lingers just a little too long. These patterns were familiar. Families learned each other's sounds over time. A change in breathing could wake someone instantly. A cough could ripple awareness through the room, even if no one moved. Which spoke often in winter. Beams contracted in the cold. Floors creaked as temperatures shifted. These sounds were sharp at first, then softened as people recognized them. A house settling into the night. Outside, the wind found every weakness. It pressed against shutters, slipped through gaps, traced lines along stone. Sometimes it whistled faintly. Sometimes it thudded in short bursts. Each gust carried the suggestion of open space beyond the walls. You might hear snow sliding from a roof, or ice cracking along eaves. These sounds were brief, but they traveled clearly in the cold air, lingering in the mind after they faded. Animals added another layer. A dog might sigh and shift its weight. Livestock housed nearby could stamp a hoof or rustle straw. Mice scratched quietly within walls, their movements barely audible but persistent. These sounds reminded sleepers that life continued all around them, even in darkness, even in cold. At times, the night seemed to hold its breath. No wind, no fire crackle, no movement at all. In these moments, awareness sharpened further. Silence became heavy, almost loud in its absence of sound. You might notice your own ears straining, waiting. The body remains alert in silence, unsure whether calm or threat has settled in. Then, inevitably, something stirs again. A sleep returns. The fire murmurs. The night exhales. Farther away, beyond the walls, other sounds drifted in when conditions allowed. A distant howl, perhaps a wolf calling from the woods. Not frequent, but never forgotten. These calls were reminders of distance, of vulnerability of the world beyond the small circle of warmth. Occasionally, human sounds carried as well. A voice from another dwelling. Footsteps on frozen ground. The brief clatter of a door. These noises were rare and often unwelcome, drawing attention to movement when stillness felt safer. You may imagine how each unfamiliar sound caused muscles to tense briefly. Not panic, but readiness. Sleep paused. Listening took over. Rain, when it came, was a constant presence, dripping from eaves, tapping against shutters, seeping into the ground. Snow was quieter, but its weight made itself known through subtle shifts and creaks. The night was a conversation between shelter and weather. Those inside listened carefully, learning what each sound meant, which could be ignored, which required waking fully. Inside the room, smaller sounds continued. Fabric brushing against skin, teeth clicking softly as someone shivered, the faint scrape of a hand pulling a blanket higher. These noises blended together into a low, living hum. Not loud, not chaotic, but constant enough to remind everyone that rest was shared, fragile, and ongoing. You might imagine drifting in and out of sleep, carried by this soundscape. A half-dream forms, shaped by crackling fire and distant wind. Then a noise pulls you back, gently, not urgently. Time passes slowly in this state. Minutes stretch. Hours soften. The night becomes something endured through listening rather than seeing. Sounds also mark danger quietly. A sudden crash of wind. A sharp snap of wood breaking. A cough that deepened into something heavier. These moments did not always bring action, but they brought awareness. Most of the time, the night remained ordinary. It spoke in familiar tones. Those who slept learned to trust these sounds, even as they reminded them of the cold waiting just beyond the walls. As fatigue deepened, sounds blurred. Individual noises lost their edges, merging into a soft background presence. The mind stopped naming each one. Listening became passive. This was when true rest sometimes arrived. Not deep, uninterrupted sleep, but a gentle sinking into stillness, buoyed by the knowledge that others listened too. Winter nights were survived collectively, even in silence, through shared warmth, through shared sound, through the quiet understanding that someone, somewhere nearby, remained awake enough to notice if the night changed. And so the darkness continued, filled not with fear, but with listening. As the night deepened, the body revealed its quiet limits. Winter made no announcement when it pressed those limits. It did not arrive suddenly. It settled in slowly, through stiffness, shallow breathing, and the dull awareness that something was not quite right. Illness often showed itself first in the dark. During the day, movement distracted from discomfort. Work kept the mind busy. But at night, when stillness took over, every sensation became clearer. A sore throat burned more noticeably. A fever made blankets feel both heavy and insufficient. Joints ached in the cold, their pain sharpened by long hours without movement. You might imagine lying awake, aware of your own body in a way daylight never required. Each breath felt counted, each swallow deliberate. The quiet made it impossible to ignore what the body was doing. Coughs were common in winter, dry ones that scraped the chest, wet ones that lingered and returned again and again. People tried to suppress them, knowing how sound carried at night. Still, the body insisted. When someone coughed repeatedly, others listened without opening their eyes. Concern moved silently through the room. Not panic, but recognition. Illness was familiar. It visited often. It stayed longer in winter. There was little to be done once darkness fell. No remedies prepared. No fires stoked high without reason. Care was passive at night. Observation replaced action. Injuries behaved differently after sunset. A cut that seemed minor during the day throbbed once warmth faded. A twisted ankle stiffened. A bruised rib made turning painful. Sleep required careful positioning. People learned how to rest around discomfort. A slight lift to the shoulder. A folded cloth placed under a knee. Small adjustments repeated over and over. You might imagine someone waking briefly, shifting, then lying still again, hoping the pain would dull. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it lingered like a low hum beneath thought. The cold complicated everything. It slowed healing. It tightened muscles. It crept into the smallest gaps. Even wrapped in shared blankets, warmth faded over hours. Children were watched closely at night. Their breathing, their warmth. A fever felt more dangerous after sunset, when no one could seek help or gather supplies. Mothers and elders listened for changes, hands resting lightly on foreheads. Some nights passed without incident. Others stretched long and uncertain. Sleep came in fragments. Dreams tangled with discomfort, producing restless movement and quiet murmurs. You may imagine drifting awake, unsure how much time has passed. The fire has dimmed further. The room feels colder. Your body feels heavier. Fatigue settles deeper, not refreshing, but persistent. The mind wanders in these hours. Thoughts repeat. Worries move in slow circles. Will morning come soon? Will the cold ease? Will this pain remain? For some, the night became a test of endurance rather than rest. They lay still, conserving energy, waiting. Each hour felt longer than the last. In medieval winter, illness did not announce its severity quickly. It unfolded gradually. A chill one night, weakness the next day, a longer night after that. People understood this rhythm. They did not name it, but they recognized when the body was losing ground. Care shifted subtly. Someone stayed closer. Someone listened more carefully. At night, the absence of activity made these changes more noticeable. The quiet magnified concern, a breathing pattern that changed. A sleeper who did not stir. A cough that stopped suddenly. You might imagine the room holding its breath in such moments. Not fear exactly, more a shared stillness, attentive and restrained. Not every long night ended the same way. Many mornings came as expected. Weakness eased. Pain softened. Life resumed, slowly. But winter taught patience with uncertainty. It asked people to accept that not everything could be fixed before dawn. For those injured or ill, time stretched differently. Minutes crawled. Hours blurred. The darkness felt endless, even though it was not. Sleep, when it arrived, was thin, light, easily broken. But it was still sleep, and it still mattered. The body took what it could. As fatigue deepened, discomfort sometimes faded into the background. Sensation dulled. The body chose rest over awareness. You may imagine that moment. The quiet surrender to exhaustion. Not relief, but acceptance. The night continues, and you continue within it. Others in the room sense these shifts without words. They adjusted blankets. They moved closer. They stayed awake a little longer. Winter nights were survived not through strength alone, but through endurance, through waiting, through listening, through shared stillness. And when morning finally approached, it did not erase the night. It simply replaced darkness with light, leaving bodies changed in small ways, marked by another night endured. Outside the warmth of the home, the world took on a different shape. Winter nights stretched long, and those who moved beyond walls knew that darkness carried both stillness and uncertainty. It was here, along boundaries and over roads, that guards took their place. The night was slow. Each step across snow or frozen earth pressed quietly. Footfalls left small impressions that might never be followed. The cold made hands stiff, and breath became visible in the thin air. curling like a soft ribbon. A guard would wrap wool tightly around neck and face, leaving only eyes to witness the dim outlines of their surroundings. Boundaries, walls, fences, and palisades were not just stone or timber. They were markers of control, markers of safety. A guard patrolling along them was less concerned with action than with observation. Each gate, each corner, each stretch of darkness required attention. Yet the attention was calm, measured, almost meditative. The mind passed over familiar features repeatedly, noticing small changes. A branch shifted by wind, snow piling differently against the wall, the faint trace of animal footprints. Torches and lanterns offered pools of light. They were steady, never dazzling. Shadows stretched across the ground, sometimes revealing shapes that were not there, sometimes hiding details that could be important. The guards learned to read the edges of light, to anticipate what might appear beyond the glow. The night rewarded patience. Every movement observed slowly, every detail acknowledged without rush. The cold imposed its limits. Hands and fingers grew numb. Breathing required more effort. Muscles ached under heavy winter clothing. Yet the body adapted. Guards walked in circles or along measured paths, stretching joints subtly, conserving energy while maintaining readiness. Time passed without distinction. One step followed another. One lap along the wall, then another. The moon drifted across the sky. Clouds obscured it briefly, then revealed it again. Each movement of the celestial clock marked progress silently, without urgency. Communication was minimal. A murmur or a brief signal to a fellow guard sufficed. The night demanded restraint. Sound could carry far. Even the wind might betray a careless shout. Solitude was emphasized, yet shared. Guards took turns, understanding that the night was a long endurance. Each shift passed quietly, overlapping with the one before, creating a continuous presence across boundaries. Eyes adjusted gradually to darkness. Shapes became discernible, first in broad strokes, then in subtle details. A distant tree branch, a faint animal track, a shimmer on ice. Nothing required immediate action, yet everything demanded acknowledgement. The mind, too, settled into rhythm. Repetition became comfort, walking the same stretch repeatedly, checking the same corner multiple times, listening for the same faint noises. Snow crunching underfoot, wind brushing against armor or clothing. These patterns filled the night with structure. Without them, the darkness could feel endless. Hunger sometimes reminded the guard of the night's length. A small piece of bread, chewed slowly, could provide warmth more than energy. Water, frozen at the edges, needed patience to drink. Even these small actions became part of the vigil, measured and deliberate. Animals, familiar or wild, moved silently through the night. A fox slipping along the edge of a field, a dog pacing in its pen, an owl calling from high branches. These presences were not frightening, but noted, respected. They added texture to the hours, reminders that life persisted beyond human boundaries. Some nights were uneventful. Others brought soft disturbances, a distant shout, a wandering traveler, the subtle shift of a shadow. Each event was observed without rush. The guards were steady, aware that winter darkness itself was a test of patience, endurance, and attention. Fatigue crept in slowly. Muscles protested. Eyes watered. Thoughts wandered. Still, the rhythm of movement, the repetition of steps, the presence of colleagues, all helped maintain a careful balance between alertness and surrender to the cold night. A long winter night is measured not in moments, but in laps, in steps, in the steady progression of a vigil. The guards understood that. Survival was quiet. It was repetition. It was endurance. The night demanded respect and persistence, not action. Even when the shift ended and warmth could be reclaimed, the night left its mark. Hands stayed cold longer than expected. Muscles ached subtly. Awareness lingered, as though the darkness had seeped into the body and could not be entirely shaken off. To endure such nights required not heroism, but habit, quiet repetition, careful observation. a willingness to move slowly, think slowly, breathe slowly. And through it all, a steady understanding that the long winter night was not an enemy, but a teacher. Within the boundaries of stone walls, the courtyard took on its own character as night deepened. By day, it was a space of movement and purpose. Carts unloaded supplies, children ran in brief bursts of sunlight, and workers moved rhythmically from one task to another. But as winter nights stretched, the courtyard grew quieter, transforming into a space for observation and endurance. Small pools of light flickered from torches set against the walls. Each cast shadows that danced softly across snow-dusted cobblestones, moving just enough to suggest life without startling the eye. These shadows were companions in their own way, a gentle movement for those who watched, who waited, who kept vigil. The courtyard was rarely empty, even at the deepest hour. Guards paced along the edges, eyes adjusted to darkness, senses alert yet measured. Occasionally, a lantern swung slowly in the hands of a passing sentinel, offering momentary brightness and then fading into obscurity. Each step on stone or frost-crusted earth made a soft, rhythmic sound, unnoticed at first, then registering in the stillness. Other watchers moved less. Some were residents seeking fresh air, standing quietly at a wall or by the entrance to the hall. Their breaths came in visible puffs, curling and dispersing into the cold night. Hands were clasped or tucked inside thick sleeves, bodies folded gently against the chill. The courtyard became a place for silent reflection as much as for practical vigilance. Footsteps from distant corners carried farther than expected. The courtyard amplified the smallest noise, a shift of a cloak, a soft cough, the creak of timber. Listeners learned to separate sound from worry. Every echo did not demand action. It merely required acknowledgement. This discernment was cultivated over long nights and repeated winters. Animals added to the tapestry of quiet movement. Dogs padded softly across the snow, tails low, ears alert. Cats slinked along the stone edges, their presence nearly imperceptible, disappearing into shadows at the slightest sound. Even livestock, huddled in pens near the courtyard, contributed subtle rhythms. A soft bleat, the rustle of straw, the shuffle of hooves. Each sound became part of the nocturnal score, steady and unremarkable, yet grounding for those awake to notice. People found small routines within this space. A guard would adjust his cloak, brush snow from his boots, or stretch stiffened muscles. Another might check the alignment of gates or quietly inspect lanterns. These actions were repeated nightly, establishing a rhythm that comforted as much as it prepared. Time passed slowly, but the repetition lent it form. Hours were measured not by clocks, but by routine, step, breath, glance, and pause. Even in stillness, the night required vigilance. Eyes scanned for irregularity, a shadow moving differently, footprints in fresh snow, a subtle glimmer that might signal presence. Attention was steady, without urgency. Fatigue built gradually, but did not erode the calm. Those who watched learned to move with the night rather than against it. Temperature shaped behavior as well. The courtyard was open to wind and snow. Hands and faces grew numb. Feet felt heavy in boots. Breath formed small clouds, dissipating into the darkness. Bodies shifted subtly, warming and stretching, conserving energy while remaining alert. Shared warmth became a quiet strategy. Standing near a companion, leaning slightly against a wall together, exchanging subtle warmth without words. Inhabitants understood the unspoken agreements of nighttime life. Silence was mutual. Movement was intentional. Observation was continuous. Conversations, if they occurred at all, were whispered, deliberate, contained. Even laughter or speech carried far across frozen stone, and the night demanded restraint. The mind wandered gently in this environment. Thoughts circled slowly. Memories and reflections moved through the quiet, unhurried. Repetition of motion, footsteps, glance, breath provided a meditative framework. Each watcher became attuned not only to the external world, but to their own body, their own sensations, their own endurance. Some hours passed without incident. Others were interrupted subtly. A branch scraping against stone, the distant howl of a wolf, a slight shift in the snow where a small animal passed unseen. These intrusions were acknowledged, assessed, and then absorbed into the rhythm of the night. The courtyard itself did not startle. It simply existed as a measured space, a boundary within which life continued quietly. This endurance was not only physical, but mental. Observers learned to tolerate monotony, to accept uncertainty, to carry quiet attention without the need for action. The courtyard became both a classroom and a companion, teaching patience, observation, and the gentle art of surviving hours unbroken by daylight. By the deepest part of the night, time seemed to fold. The courtyard was both vast and intimate. Shadows stretched long. The cold penetrated slowly. The watch continued steadily, each individual a quiet anchor against the long darkness. Morning remained far away, and the night's demands persisted. Attention, endurance, and stillness. High above the courtyard, the towers and ramparts stretched toward the winter sky, their silhouettes etched against faint starlight. From these heights, the world appeared quiet, deliberate, and distant. The watchers stationed there experienced the night differently. Their isolation was greater, their vision wider, their endurance tested in subtle ways. The ascent itself was slow. Steps along narrow stone stairs echoed softly, a muted percussion in the stillness. Each footfall was careful, measured, conscious of the cold seeping through the soles of boots and the draft that wandered through arrow slits. The air grew thinner with elevation, and each breath felt slightly heavier, curling into tiny clouds that quickly dissipated into darkness. Once atop the rampart, the landscape spread below. Snow-covered fields glimmered faintly. Frozen streams caught pale moonlight, and distant lights of villages twinkled like subdued fireflies. The far-off roads were empty, save for the occasional shadow moving steadily, leaving traces that would vanish by morning. Observation from this height required patience and subtlety. One could see much, but nothing demanded immediate action. Instead, the watchers learned to see slowly, letting the night unfold in its own time. Towers offered both exposure and protection. Winds gusted across the battlements, sharp against exposed skin. Hands grew cold even through gloves, and the long hours made muscles ache. The watchers shifted weight from foot to foot, moved slightly to encourage circulation, and adjusted clothing to retain warmth. This physical endurance was quiet, unobtrusive, and continuous. Eyes became attuned to subtle movement. The way a shadow fell differently on snow, the faint glimmer of ice along a stream, the slow motion of clouds across the sky. Each detail was absorbed slowly, cataloged in the mind, yet rarely demanded immediate intervention. Winter nights taught that observation itself was both purpose and comfort. The far-off watch relied on signals as well. A distant torch, a subtle flare, or a brief movement in a sentry's line of sight could communicate without sound. Communication was sparse, deliberate, and low to avoid drawing unnecessary attention. Even the smallest signal was considered carefully, as the night magnified every gesture. Stillness dominated these hours. Time moved differently at such height. A watch could last many hours, and though eyes remained alert, the mind wandered. Observers reflected, rehearsed routines mentally, remembered past winters, or simply listened. The silence was heavy yet gentle, a companion that carried through the long vigil. The ramparts themselves were familiar friends. Stones smoothed by centuries, worn edges of steps, slight inclines, and uneven surfaces. All were memorized and incorporated into the rhythm of movement. Each watcher knew the structure intimately, trusting it to support them through the long hours. Leaning against a parapet offered a moment of rest while keeping sight lines clear. Even these small pauses were deliberate, measured, and repetitive, forming the backbone of endurance. Below, the courtyard and village seemed almost miniature. Figures moved in careful patterns, lights glimmered faintly, and the wind whispered through chimneys and tree branches. From above, one could witness the quiet persistence of human life. The distant world seemed slower, more deliberate, and yet connected through observation. Animals continued their subtle, nocturnal routines. A fox slipped silently across a field, a distant owl called, and the snow muffled the movements of smaller creatures. These sounds punctuated the night without startling the watchers. Each presence was acknowledged, measured, and allowed to exist without interference. Loneliness was tempered by shared experience. Each distant watch knew others were present elsewhere. A guard along the wall, a sentry in a nearby tower, or a traveler seeking warmth in a distant hut. The knowledge created a sense of companionship through distance, a shared endurance that did not require conversation or proximity. The cold pressed against the body steadily, subtly, reminding watchers of limits. Hands and feet remained restless despite layers of wool and leather. Faces ached from wind. Breaths came in measured clouds. Even the most disciplined observer could feel the creeping fatigue. Yet the mind adapted, learning to accommodate discomfort with repetition and stillness. The night pressed onward. Stars moved imperceptibly across the sky. Clouds drifted slowly. Snow shifted in quiet patterns across rooftops. Each hour brought no rush, no alarm, only the quiet accumulation of time passing and the slow, steady requirement of attention. Survival here was not dramatic. It was measured. It was endurance. It was the willingness to witness the dark for hours without expectation, to maintain a rhythm of observation, and to respect the stillness of both the world below and the night sky above. By the time the first signs of pre-dawn appeared, pale and subtle on the horizon, watchers could feel the culmination of the night in their bodies. Stiffness, slight numbness, and a gentle satisfaction in having endured. The towers and ramparts, silent and sturdy, had offered shelter and perspective. They had allowed the night to pass with quiet, measured patience. After long hours beneath the cold night sky, the first hints of dawn arrived quietly, almost imperceptibly. The horizon, previously dark and uniform, began to lighten with a pale, gray wash. This transition was slow, measured, and unhurried. Those who had watched through the night could feel the change more in their minds and bodies than through sight alone. The courtyard, which had been a landscape of shadows and faint torchlight, softened gradually. Stone edges, snow-covered pathways, and timbered structures emerged gently from the darkness. Each surface was revealed in stages. First the outlines, then textures, and finally the subtle warmth of reflected light. The chill of night lingered, yet the promise of morning introduced a delicate contrast, a sense of quiet renewal that demanded no action, only observation. Observers and guards stirred. Movements were slow, careful, almost ceremonial. Cloaks were adjusted, gloves removed to allow hands to stretch and warm, and boots scraped lightly against frost to shake off the accumulated chill. Every gesture was deliberate, measured, and repeated nightly. These small routines became anchors, a way to transition from the long vigil of darkness into the first phase of daily life. Torches, once essential for sight, were allowed to die down. Their flames flickered, dimming gradually as daylight strengthened, casting long, soft shadows before finally vanishing. The fading glow created a gentle cadence, a signal that one cycle had ended and another was quietly beginning. Residents of the castle and surrounding structures began their own preparatory routines. Water was drawn from wells, often covered with ice. Bread or porridge might be stirred slowly over a hearth, its aroma subtle but grounding. Even these simple actions required focus in the dim light, and yet they were performed with a calm steadiness that matched the measured unfolding of dawn. Footsteps echoed gently across courtyards and narrow hallways, careful to avoid unnecessary noise. Sleep-heavy bodies adjusted to motion, stretching stiffened muscles, and the rhythm of walking over stone and timber became familiar. Every sound was softer than during the day, yet more noticeable because the night had removed other distractions. This awareness brought both attentiveness and comfort, a sense of presence, continuity, and quiet safety. The air was crisp. Breaths came in visible puffs, mingling with faint smoke from early hearth fires. Cold fingers brushed against smooth stone or rough timber, registering texture and temperature. The contrast between the lingering night chill and the slowly increasing warmth of morning light was felt keenly, a subtle reminder of the passage of hours and the endurance required to survive the darkness. Animals responded to the first light as well. Dogs and cats moved gently, stretching and shaking off stiffness. Horses shifted in their stalls, nudging halters or stamping softly against frozen ground. Even smaller creatures began to stir quietly. The soft rustle of straw, the gentle scratching of rodents seeking warmth. These minor sounds were absorbed slowly, reassuringly, into the waking environment. Inhabitants attended to communal spaces, checking gates, sweeping cobbled pathways, and preparing for daily labor. The motions were deliberate, maintaining the rhythm established during the night while transitioning to the tasks of morning. Hands and arms moved with measured precision, bodies bending and rising, muscles warming with activity, breath steady and controlled. Breakfast preparations unfolded quietly. Simple foods were arranged with care: grain, porridge, and dried fruits. Water was warmed, dishes scraped clean, and fires tended. Every gesture reinforced endurance, teaching the body to work in harmony with slow time rather than rush against it. Observers might sip slowly, savoring warmth and sustenance, appreciating the calm of early light. Social interactions were sparse and gentle. Greetings were low, murmured, or expressed with small nods. Conversation, if it occurred, was deliberate and slow, often revolving around practical details, the condition of supplies, the status of travelers, or the observation of the weather. There was little need for urgency. The environment itself imposed its rhythm, and inhabitants adapted naturally. By mid-morning, the first full light illuminated the courtyard and ramparts. Shadows shortened. Surfaces revealed textures and subtle imperfections, and movement across the castle became more confident. Yet the memory of the night's long darkness lingered. The awareness of what had been endured, the steady patience required, and the calm attentiveness that ensured survival. Preparation for the day's duties included inspections. Guards checked weapons and armor quietly, ensuring readiness without haste. Food stores were reviewed carefully, firewood stacked neatly, and doors and gates assessed for security. The rhythm was unhurried, each step methodical, teaching resilience through consistency. Even minor errors could be corrected calmly, without urgency, reinforcing the sense of measured endurance that defined life after long winter nights. Above all, dawn offered reassurance. It was not dramatic or sudden. The light arrived gently, illuminating the world without demanding attention or excitement. Survival from night to morning was quiet, cumulative, and understated. The day's beginning was observed rather than heralded, respected rather than celebrated, and met with steady, mindful movements. Through the courtyard and along the ramparts, observers and residents alike understood the value of these early hours. The chance to recover from the cold, to align routines, to ready themselves for the practicalities of day, and to honor the enduring rhythm of life through long, harsh winters. As dawn settled fully, the castle and its surrounding lands stirred into a slow rhythm of practical activity. The night's shadows had retreated, replaced by the pale, steady light that revealed textures previously hidden. Frost-laced rooftops, icy paths, and the rough grains of stone walls that had kept inhabitants sheltered through the hours of darkness. The work of mourning was quiet, deliberate, and persistent, yet each gesture carried the subtle weight of survival. Courtyards were swept with brooms, brushing away scattered snow and debris left by the wind. Each stroke was slow, repetitive, and comforting in its rhythm. Hands and wrists warmed gradually with movement, muscles loosening after the long stillness of night. The scraping sound of bristles against stone echoed softly, blending with distant animal calls and the occasional creak of wooden gates. The repetition was hypnotic, a cadence that encouraged attention while soothing the mind. Water was drawn from wells, the icy rim numbing fingers briefly before being submerged. The bucket rose, heavy with clear, cold liquid, dripping onto stone floors or into large cauldrons for heating. Steam rose slowly, curling into the cold morning air, marking the transition from night's chill to the tempered warmth of daily activity. Washing hands, utensils, and simple linens was performed with measured care, the cold water reminding residents of the endurance required to maintain comfort and cleanliness. Food preparation continued steadily. Porridge was stirred over embers that glowed softly in hearths. Meat and bread arranged on rough wooden tables, and water warmed for tea or light broth. Hands moved with practiced precision, adding measured grains, stirring slowly, tasting carefully. Every step reinforced quiet attention and a steady mind. Even minor mistakes, such as a grain sticking to the side of a pot, were corrected calmly, without disruption, maintaining the rhythm of survival. Outside, snow and frost were assessed for safety. Paths were scraped, horse troughs cleared, and fences examined for integrity. Guards and laborers moved with quiet purpose, aware that early attention to small details ensured security and comfort throughout the day. The wind tugged at cloaks and scarves, encouraging movement to maintain warmth. The cold was present but manageable, a constant reminder of the environment's quiet authority. Animals were tended with care. Horses were brushed, feed measured, and water replaced. Dogs patrolled quietly alongside their masters, ears attentive, noses to the ground. Smaller creatures, such as chickens or goats, were gently coaxed from their shelters, careful not to startle them. Each interaction required patience, a gentle firmness, and awareness of both safety and warmth. Residents themselves moved cautiously but steadily. Joints stiff from a night were flexed slowly, arms stretched, backs bent in preparation for labor. Breaths were visible in the air, short puffs of warmth rising and dissipating against the lingering chill. The mind and body synchronized through repeated, intentional gestures, chopping firewood, hauling water, arranging tools, and tending simple repairs. These were not hurried tasks. They were sustained, deliberate acts of endurance. Observation continued alongside activity. Even while performing chores, the eyes measured the day's light, watched distant hills and roads, and noted subtle changes in the weather. Clouds were traced across pale skies, the wind's direction assessed through drifting smoke or fluttering banners. This attentiveness was steady, unobtrusive, and built into the very fabric of survival. It reminded inhabitants that the quiet night had passed, and that cautious awareness remained essential in the day to follow. Mealtimes were gentle, unhurried affairs. Small groups gathered at tables, sharing sustenance and occasional low murmurs. Conversation was muted, practical, and slow, focusing on immediate needs rather than news or emotion. Even these small social gestures carried a sense of endurance. The sharing of warmth, the careful passage of utensils, and a measured sipping of hot drinks contributed to both comfort and communal stability. The repetition of chores, observation, and movement created a subtle hypnosis. Hours unfolded in gentle cycles, as hands moved, eyes scanned, and bodies adjusted to cold and light. Each resident maintained personal habits, such as tightening cloaks, adjusting gloves, or rubbing hands to restore circulation. These small routines, repeated quietly and without urgency, became the backbone of daily endurance, providing stability against environmental pressures. By mid-morning, the effects of these routines were evident. Muscles had warmed, frost had melted, and the courtyard's surfaces were more navigable. The day's light offered clarity and a sense of progress. Yet the awareness of the night's darkness remained, a silent acknowledgement of the endurance it required. Survival was ongoing, measured, and built in the steady repetition of minor actions. The quiet intensity of early chores offered a meditative rhythm. Each sweep of a broom, each stir of a pot, each adjustment of clothing served dual purposes: practical survival and a calming, grounding routine. In these moments, inhabitants found both comfort and preparation for what lay ahead. Winter, though relentless, was confronted through these small, continuous acts, performed without rush, without drama, but with steady attention. By mid-morning, the castle and its surrounding grounds had fully awakened from the lingering shadows of night. The light, still soft but growing steadily stronger, revealed textures and patterns that had remained hidden in the pre-dawn hours. Stone walls glimmered faintly with residual frost, rooftops glistened with ice crystals slowly melting, and pathways bore the subtle imprints of footsteps from early activity. There was a quiet beauty in this steady unveiling, a deliberate, patient transition from night into the structured rhythm of the day. Those within the castle continued their routines, moving with the deliberate pace established since the first hints of dawn. Sweeping, chopping, and arranging continued as hands and muscles, now fully awake, performed the repeated tasks with practiced precision. Each motion was measured, each gesture deliberate, fostering endurance through repetition. Even as the cold air persisted, it was moderated by sustained movement. The body learned to coexist with discomfort, neither avoiding it nor yielding entirely, cultivating a quiet, patient resilience. Observation accompanied activity. Eyes traced the outlines of distant hills and forests, noting subtle changes in light and shadow. The wind's direction was followed through the sway of branches or the flutter of banners, while clouds drifted slowly, casting brief patterns on stone and snow. Such attention was habitual, woven seamlessly into routine. It required no conscious effort, yet remained essential, a soft vigilance that allowed inhabitants to navigate both practical chores and environmental awareness simultaneously. Small domestic routines provided further structure. Fires were stoked with gentle care, ensuring warmth for those still lingering near hearths. Pots were adjusted on stoves or hearths, water added or stirred, and porridge or broth tasted, portioned, and set aside. Hands worked deliberately, enjoying the soft, repetitive rhythm, and savoring the quiet satisfaction of simple accomplishment. Each movement reinforced calm and focus, sustaining the body and mind in tandem. Throughout the castle, quiet observation extended beyond tasks. Residents scanned the courtyard and walls for any subtle signs of change. An uneven stone, an accumulation of frost that might pose a hazard, or the faint tracks of passing animals. This attentiveness was steady, unobtrusive, and continuous. It created a subtle meditation, blending the awareness of survival with the gentle progression of time, allowing the mind to relax even as it remained alert to the environment. Interactions remained subdued. Soft greetings passed between individuals, nods exchanged rather than spoken words. Any conversation was practical, measured, and calm, focused on the management of provisions, the timing of duties, or the status of distant paths and travelers. The pace of speech matched the pace of the day, slow, steady, and considerate. Such exchanges reinforced a sense of continuity and stability, allowing social bonds to persist without disrupting the quiet flow of routine. Attention to small details marked the continuation of mid-morning life. Clothing was adjusted to maintain warmth, boots were checked for comfort, gloves repositioned to ease circulation, and cloaks shifted to protect from shifting winds. Each minor action contributed to endurance, teaching the body and mind to navigate subtle discomforts with calm acceptance rather than urgency. The repetition itself became reassuring, a quiet rhythm mirroring the broader cadence of survival in a winter-bound castle. Animal care also persisted with gentle attention. Horses were brushed and tended once more, water replaced, and feed checked. Dogs and cats stretched and moved through familiar pathways, their bodies reflecting the warmth and alertness gradually returning with light. Even smaller creatures were observed, straw stirred and shelters refreshed, maintaining the balance of life in harmony with the quiet routines of human inhabitants. Time passed gently, measured not by clocks, but by the accumulation of movement, sound, and observation. Frost melted incrementally in pale sunlight, footprints hardened in patches of shade, and smoke from hearths rose lazily, dissipating into the air above the courtyard. The continuity of these small, deliberate acts provided reassurance. The long night had ended, and survival had been achieved, one careful, repetitive gesture at a time. By the close of mid-morning, the castle hummed with understated activity. The echoes of earlier chores lingered softly in hallways. The warmth of fires spread through stone and timber, and the inhabitants, steady and patient, observed the unfolding day. Their routines reflected endurance as much as survival, a subtle choreography of movement, attention, and care that persisted quietly, almost imperceptibly, yet completely necessary for life in a winter-bound landscape. Through this period, the mind and body synchronized. Repetition of tasks, combined with calm observation, cultivated a meditative state. Awareness of environment, subtle changes in light, and the soft rhythm of chores encouraged a steady, drowsy attentiveness. Even in full light, the memory of the long, dark night remained present, offering a sense of continuity and perspective, a gentle reminder of endurance without urgency or alarm. In these hours, inhabitants of the castle existed within a delicate balance: warmth and cold, light and shadow, rest and activity. Each element was acknowledged, measured, and attended to with calm diligence. The passage of time was recognized slowly, with patience and care, fostering both resilience and reflection. Survival, in the quiet, steady unfolding of mid-morning, was not dramatic or urgent. It was deliberate, repetitive, and gently hypnotic. The day would continue, slowly moving toward tasks, observation, and eventual rest, but for now, mid-morning provided the space to integrate the night's endurance into the day's rhythm. Every sweep of a broom, every stir of a pot, every glance toward frost or distant hills reinforced the quiet assurance that life persisted, that preparation and observation were sufficient, and that the body, warmed and alert, could meet the day with calm continuity. As the sun moved toward its descent, the day gradually eased into its later hours. Shadows lengthened across the frost-covered courtyards, stretching over stone and timber with quiet deliberation. The chill of early morning softened into the lingering crispness of late afternoon, and the inhabitants, having completed their tasks and observations, began to transition toward the slower pace of evening. There was a gentle satisfaction in the rhythm of the day. The measured work, the careful attention, and the quiet endurance had carried them through another cycle, and now the world seemed to pause, allowing reflection and stillness. Residents moved through corridors and hallways with subdued steps, the echo of earlier activity fading into soft stone reverberations. Tools were returned to racks, fires replenished with careful placement of logs, and water vessels refilled for the evening. Each gesture, deliberate and practiced, reminded them that survival was a series of small, thoughtful acts. Even the simplest motions, adjusting a cloak, closing a shutter, or sweeping a hearth, carried a sense of completion, a quiet affirmation that the day's work had been done. By late afternoon, the castle settled into a serene rhythm. The sounds of hammering and chopping had faded, replaced by muted footsteps, the occasional murmur of conversation, and the distant clatter of animals being secured. Windows and doors framed the pale winter light, its angle highlighting textures that had been overlooked in morning brightness. Frost lingered in sheltered corners, and smoke from hearths spiraled lazily upward, dissipating into the still air. This was a time of gentle observation, a moment to note the environment, the movement of clouds, and the changing colors of stone and wood. Some residents paused at windows or doorways, breathing in the cold air that carried both the crisp scent of snow and the faint warmth of sunlit walls. Their hands were tucked into sleeves or wrapped around mugs of hot liquid, savoring the brief comfort of warmth against the chill. Eyes traced the courtyard, the pathways, and the distant hills, noting subtle shifts. Footprints hardened or faded, smoke from distant chimneys rose and wavered, and small birds flitted across the frozen landscape. Observation at this hour was quiet, unhurried, and meditative, an extension of the day's attentive rhythm. Meals were prepared in muted harmony. Bread was sliced, broth ladled into bowls, and small quantities of meat or cheese portioned with care. The act of sharing sustenance was gentle, a practical affirmation of life and endurance rather than indulgence. Conversation remained sparse, deliberate, and calm. Words were chosen with the same thoughtfulness as movements, reflecting the slow, steady cadence of the day. Even silence was comfortable, punctuated only by the soft clatter of utensils or the occasional sigh of someone settling after a long day of activity. Evening chores were simpler, quieter, and more reflective. Fires were replenished to provide warmth through the encroaching night. Lanterns lit to cast soft, steady glows, and animals secured for safety. Tools and clothing were tidied, paths inspected briefly for hazards, and water stored for use before the next morning. These acts, though modest, were integral to endurance, each a link in the continuous chain of survival that spanned the day and prepared for the night to come. The inhabitants began to prepare themselves for rest with the same deliberate care that marked all their routines. Cloaks and heavy garments were removed or adjusted, blankets fluffed, and beds or sleeping areas readied. The tactile actions of folding, patting, or smoothing created a sense of order and completion. In these moments, the body acknowledged the fatigue accumulated over hours of activity, the steady exertion of movement, and the subtle tensions of attentiveness and observation. Each sigh or stretch marked the quiet transition from wakefulness into restfulness. Eyes often lingered on familiar corners of the castle, the gentle flicker of firelight highlighting the grain of wooden beams or the texture of stone walls. Shadows shifted slowly, merging into the deepening dimness, and the castle itself seemed to breathe in tandem with its residents. The awareness of environmental pressures, cold, fatigue, and lingering caution remained, but was softened by familiarity, preparation, and the steady practices of daily life. Survival was no longer urgent. It was assured for this night through the repetition, care, and attention that it carried everyone through the day. As the final light waned, the mind could drift, guided by the comforting repetition of earlier routines and the knowledge of the steady rhythms of life. Thoughts became quieter, focused on small details, the warmth of a hearth, the soft rustle of blankets, the distant movement of animals, the steady hush of wind against stone. Breaths lengthened, muscles relaxed, and a gentle drowsiness settled in, a cumulative effect of day-long attentiveness, activity, and endurance. In the quiet, even those who remained vigilant in distant watch posts experienced a slowing. Their observations became meditative, the far-off landscape bathed in dim, subtle tones. The fading sun left a horizon tinged with muted colors, and even the cold seemed softened by the presence of stone walls and human preparation. Awareness persisted, but it was calm and measured, a quiet companion rather than an urgent necessity. The castle, now partially emptied of active motion, seemed almost timeless. The previous night's shadows had given way to daylight, and now the approaching night awaited with the same constancy. Inhabitants nestled into their spaces, surrounded by the fruits of careful labor, warm hearths, tended animals, and secure pathways. Survival had been maintained without haste or alarm, carried by the measured accumulation of small, deliberate actions. Even in the last moments before sleep, the mind traced the day's movements, sweeping, feeding, stoking fires, observing paths and skies. Each gesture was revisited internally, not as a source of worry, but as a gentle reminder of continuity and preparedness. There was calm and repetition, in the quiet acknowledgement of one's own endurance, and in the soft reassurance that the rhythms of the castle, the frost, and the day itself would continue as long as attention and care were applied. Finally, lids were closed, doors secured, fires allowed to glow without active tending, and the castle embraced its inhabitants in a gentle hush. Night would arrive gradually, with its cold, shadows, and the soft murmurs of distant forests or frozen hills. Yet, having navigated both the night and the day, each resident could rest with measured assurance. The world outside was steady and enduring, and within the castle, warmth and routine provided a haven against the cold, the dark, and the subtle pressures of survival. As eyes closed and breathing slowed, the quiet meditation of the day remained. Survival was a matter of rhythm, observation, and careful attention to the smallest tasks. Endurance was built not through drama or intensity, but through repetition, measured movement, and gentle awareness. In this way, the medieval winter night, though inherently demanding, was met with calm preparation, and sleep arrived as both reward and necessity, quietly carrying the body and mind into the protective embrace of darkness. The slow rise and fall of breath, the warmth retained from midday chores, the soft shadows cast by flickering hearths, all combined to ease consciousness toward rest. The world, cold and enduring beyond the walls, continued its quiet, relentless rhythms, while inside, those who had tended, observed, and persevered allowed themselves a well-earned pause. Night, inevitable yet mitigated by preparation, became a companion rather than a threat. In the long hours to follow, while some sleepers might dream and others simply rest, the castle held its shape, the stone walls cold but steady, the hearths glowing faintly, and the routine of survival etched into the very rhythm of life within. And as the final embers glimmered, the quiet endurance of another day faded, leaving a tranquil hush, a gentle stillness, and the calm assurance that tomorrow, like today, would unfold in careful, measured continuity.